Hello, I'm Anna. I'm currently the president of the Bereaved Student Network at the University of Leeds. We're making this video as an alternative to our Supporting a Friend workshop. We've put it together mainly for people that haven't lost someone, but some parts might also be useful if you're bereaved yourself. I'm going to start by giving a bit of an introduction to grief and try to build up a picture of what it might feel like and look like. So including looking at a few models, and then another committee member, Andrew, is going to talk about his personal experience. In the second half of the video, I'll then try to summarise a few ideas for supporting someone and a few challenges that you might come across as a friend. We're not professionals, we just want to open up an important conversation and hopefully make things a little bit easier. So to begin with, I'm going to talk quite generally about grief and look at a few models. Grief is what we experience when we lose something or someone that is significant to us. So you might grieve after a relationship breaks down, or if, for example, you develop an illness that means that you can no longer live your life in the same way. These are big life changes which can cause feelings of grief. Normally, though, we associate grief with bereavement, which means that somebody's died. It's generally thought of as an emotional experience, so we associate it with pain and with sadness, but also with anger, numbness, guilt, in some cases relief. There's lots of different emotions that grief can be manifested through. For some people it might also be a physical thing, so you might experience changes in your appetite, in your sleeping habits. You might have physical symptoms of anxiety, so a racing heart, for example. You might have headaches, you might feel like your bones are bruised. These are all quite normal things during your grief. Before I talk through the models, I want to say that grief is very unique to the person experiencing it. So it will depend on their relationship with the person, their support network, their personality and their beliefs. Lots of different factors that mean grief is going to manifest in different ways. So while models might be insightful and helpful, they shouldn't be taken as facts. The model that's probably the most well known was developed by Kübler-Ross and suggests that we move through 5 stages, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And while I feel like these feelings are fairly common during grief, it's a lot more complicated. And instead of being a timeline that we move through, your grief is more likely to look something like this. The dual model is another model of grief which suggests that when you're grieving you alternate between 2 states. One when you're directly confronting your grief, so you're thinking about it, talking about it, writing about it, it's consciously there. And then there are moments when we separate ourselves from our grief, so either to avoid the pain or just so we can function on a day-to-day basis and look towards the future. So for example, going to work, meeting new people, these sorts of things. Most people will start off spending a lot of time in the state of loss, thinking about it, and gradually move towards the restorative state. But it's normal to jump back and forth between them, even years down the line. And you might feel as well that you're actually drifting somewhere between the two, and that's very normal too. One final model that I want to talk about before I move on to discuss coping strategies is the fried egg model, and it will make sense why it's called that in a moment. So the idea is that if this is your life, when someone dies, grief fills up absolutely every single part of your life. There's no area that is not affected by your grief. And originally what people thought was that over time that little scribble which fills up your whole life becomes smaller, and it might just be something more like this, so it shrinks. But what people are saying more now is that actually this the effects of your grief, they stay the same. It doesn't get any smaller, but what does happen is that your life grows around it. So this is quite a hopeful model because it suggests that it doesn't ignore the fact that your grief is going to be this huge part of your life, and it probably has still affected every single thing that happened before that person died. You're never going to go back to having this space again, but your life will grow around it. So I find that quite helpful.
Hello there, my name's Andrew, and I'm one of the former committee members from the Bereaved Student Network, and I'm here to talk to you guys today a little bit about my own experiences of loss, and also to talk to you about how discussing the death of a loved one should be a fairly normal thing. So I lost my father when I was 17 years old. He left the house one morning for work, and on his way he had a brain hemorrhage, and it was a bit of a bizarre time because it was right in the middle of the 2012 Olympics. So while the rest of the country was celebrating all the gold medals that we were winning, my family, we were in ICU praying that my dad was going to wake up. And while there was all this happiness and ecstasy going on outside the hospital, we were trying to come to terms with the fact that my father was dying. We waited for him to wake up, and we kept our fingers crossed and all of that jazz, but unfortunately he was too badly brain damaged, so in the end we decided to donate his organs. And when we left the hospital, the Olympics was coming to a close, and we were very it just felt strange that the whole country was still celebrating while we were going through one of the worst experiences of our lives. And it was a bit of a whirlwind because the day after the funeral I went to get my AS results from school, and again everybody was celebrating, everybody was in a really good mood, having got reasonably good exam results. I was, as you can imagine, very upset about the circumstances of what had happened. Going back to school was quite tough. You see, nobody really knew what to say to me, not my colleagues or even the school teachers, because at the age of 17, 18, what the hell do you say to somebody? Or how do you know what to say to someone who's been through one of the worst experiences of their lives? And as a result, they said nothing, and it was just, I felt really, really awkward walking around school, because people would see me walk into the room and it was like, oh crap, there's Andrew. His dad's died, eyes down. What the hell are we going to say to him? This was based on the entirety of this went on through the entirety of my final year at school, and it wasn't just my classmates as well. It was my teachers too. There'd be times when I'd be walking down the corridor, and nobody would ask me how I was, and nobody would, they'd very much be trying to look straight ahead and not say a word to me. It was very, very it was a very difficult period. You sort of felt like the elephant in the room, or as if you'd done something particularly bad, and people didn't want to talk to you for that reason. And when you go through a bereavement, one of the things that I certainly noticed was that it was quite an isolating experience, and it was compounded by, this feeling of social exclusion that was happening at school. So yeah, it was a very difficult period for me to deal with. So, moving on to discuss why it's important to have somebody to talk to. When you go through a bereavement, your emotions are all over the place. And you may have heard of the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. What they don't tell you about all these is that they don't come in order necessarily, and you can go through all of them within a 24-hour period. And for me, the main emotion that I felt was anger. I was very angry at how unfair the situation was. My father was a very young, very fit and healthy man, a very loving man, and he didn't deserve an early death. I was angry that nobody at school was able to give me any sort of support, or had bothered to ask me how I was feeling. And like I say, with hindsight, at the time it was very understandable, but when things were at their worst, all I needed was somebody to just ask me how I was. And I was also very angry with certain members of my family, as a lot of them didn't know what to say either. And it all comes together to a downward spiral for your mental health. One of the best things to help counteract that downward spiral is to have somebody to talk to. And the person doesn't even have to have any experience of a bereavement, they just have to be willing to listen to what you've got to say and to help you work through stuff. Very often all I needed was somebody to just acknowledge that I was having a shit day and to ask me how I was. That's it. Admittedly, it's a lot easier to talk to people who've been there and understand what it is that you're going through, which is why we set up the Bereaved Student Network, because it helps bring people who have suffered a loss together and they can offer each other some sort of support. And it's incredibly important to talk about how you're feeling as well, because it helps you better comprehend the situation and to acknowledge how you're feeling. It helps you take a more objective view and to step out of the situation.
Now, it's not very helpful to try and push yourself or somebody else to stop grieving or move on from grief, because it's actually a very natural response to loss and it needs to be felt in order to heal. But there are a few things that you can do to make that journey a little bit easier. And like I said earlier, grief is different for everyone. So when you're offering support, you're going to have to use your own judgment a little bit about what will work and what won't, depending on that person. And this will also depend on how close you are or what your relationship is. So while some things might be appropriate, other things might be better to leave to someone else. So for example, someone who's maybe closer to them or has a more immediate relationship with the person that died, something like that. If you're not sure whether you're the right person, I would say ask them. Tell them that you're there and that you're willing to chat or do other things to help, but also show them that they can say no if they'd rather you didn't. So for example, you could message them and say, I'm here for you, it would be nice to do this sometime, but don't worry if not, and you don't even have to reply to that message. It's about offering support without putting pressure on that person. So if you reach out to the person and they do want to talk, that's great. Getting stuff out of their system will be really helpful, but only if you respond in an open way to what they have to say. The last thing you should do is ask how they are and then change the conversation before they're finished or dismiss what they're saying. It might feel uncomfortable and you might not know what to say, but that's okay. It's important to stay with it and listen anyway. Don't be worried about making things worse. The worst has already happened. So if the person cries or gets angry or reacts in a certain way, then you haven't caused this. The emotions will have already been there, and it's actually probably healthy for them to express that. A few tips for listening, I would say, is ask questions. Do this sensitively, so it's not like you're there trying to get the gossip, but you're just showing them that you care and that you know the details are important. Don't be afraid to say the person's name or to say the word dead or died. Tiptoeing around it and not actually mentioning what's happened can be it can be a bit hurtful, actually. Don't disagree or agree or try to put words in their mouth or try to explain it away. You don't have to have a response to what they're saying. That's okay. You just have to kind of be there through whatever they're expressing. Essentially, the message that you're trying to give is, I'm listening, I'm trying to understand, but even if I don't, I'm here for you. So yeah, do be there to talk to the person, but also don't force it. They might not be ready, or they may not want you to be the person that they talk to. This doesn't mean that you're not close with them, and they might just want you to be someone that they talk about other things with. You might be a bit more like light relief or something. That's a very valuable thing to be as a friend as well. Let them decide and try not to be offended, except whether they want to speak to you about it or not. Another way of supporting someone is encouraging them to stay healthy and to help them keep functioning as much as they can. So you can check in and see how they're doing, asking if they're eating okay, if they're coping okay with work, for example, if they're still getting out of the house and doing exercise. If they are struggling, you can offer practical help. So you can ask if they want you to do their shopping for them or cook a meal. As well as doing things for them, it might be nice to do things with them. So ask if they want to cook a meal together, or go to an exercise class together, or go for a walk together. I think it's a good tip here to be quite specific with your suggestions. So while it's nice to say, I'm here if you need me, asking more directly, would you like me to bring over some food one day this week? Or I'm going to this class on Tuesday, would you like to come? More specific things like that can be more helpful, because grief can make you quite indecisive, and it might be a bit overwhelming if someone just says, let me know what you want me to do, because they might not know what they want. So giving options is always a good way to approach that. Again, like with the talking, if they don't want your help, don't be offended. They'll still appreciate the gesture, and they might take you up on it later down the line. So keep offering that support, but with no pressure for them to accept it. A nice thing to do is make loving gestures that don't require a response from them. So sending cards or messages, maybe sending like small gifts or care packages, not just once, but maybe a few weeks and a few months on from the death. At anniversaries, it'd be really great if you could remember the dates of those and send a card, just even if you say something simply as simple as, I'm thinking of you. These small things can be really uplifting and help people get through the most difficult patches. If they feel up for it, then it's good to spend time together and do nice things, as well as all the deep stuff. We all need a bit of light relief, so it's okay if you just want to have a laugh together or do something completely unrelated to their grief. But do remember that their idea of fun might have changed a little bit. They're less likely to want to go into like noisy, crowded spaces, for example, or meet up in big groups. So it might be an idea to organise one-on-one meetups or smaller gatherings instead, doing things like walks or going for coffee or cooking together, going to see a film. These might be a little bit easier for someone that's grieving to manage. But do still invite them to bigger things as well, because it's good to feel included, and you never know, some people might actually fancy going on a night out or going for a pint at the pub. So give them the option to do whichever they fancy. If you're worried that the person isn't coping very well and it doesn't seem to improve, you can signpost them to professional support. So try having an honest conversation with them, and remember that you can't force them to do anything. So for example, with seeing a counsellor, they have to want to do that themselves. And maybe just explain that you're worried and think it would be a good idea. Don't talk about it like it's a failure, but it's a normal thing to do after you've lost someone. And you can offer to help look something up or to arrange it if they want you to. Remember that you can be there to support them, but you can't fix them, and to an extent they have to get through this on their own. So you have to let them take some of the responsibility as much as you can try and support them as well. So to summarise, grief is unique and unpredictable. It can be a roller coaster. The person might find it incredibly difficult at times, and you as someone supporting them might also find it difficult. That's completely normal and healthy. It might change your relationship with the person. It sometimes might cause some tensions, but if you try to stay open and approach it in a loving way, then it could also bring you closer, and there'll be some lovely moments along the way. Don't worry about being perfect, just do your best and show the person that you care in whichever way feels right for you. There's lots of resources out there, so do reach out for support if you need it, and get advice from friends, family, professionals, places online if you need to. And of course, the Breathe Student Network inbox is always open too. Thank you very much for listening, and whatever your situation is, I hope that you're okay and that the person who has lost someone is okay. Things will get better. It's just a bit of a journey to get there, but it will.